So does a lack of sleep lead to more body fat?
No.
End of
If you
podcast.
you do not automatically just gain extra body fat if you've had a poor night's sleep. It doesn't happen. You need to be in an energy surplus for that to happen, right?
Yeah. So why do people commonly see their scale weight potentially move around if they have a bad night's sleep?
Well, number one, that scale weight fluctuation isn't going to be indicative of any loss or gain in lean body mass or fat tissue in that moment in time. It's usually just going to be an increase in water levels. If you haven't had a good night's sleep, water retention is likely to be up due to stress or whatever issue is sort of keeping you up. And that's going to show up on the scale as either an increase. Most of the time it's an increase, but sometimes it's also a decrease. But any sort of scale weight fluctuations that do come from temporary poor nights of sleep does not automatically mean you've just gained fat that night. I think a lot of people, yes, sleep is extremely important, and we will talk about the importance of it today. But to think that, I've had a poor night's sleep, therefore I'm getting fatter, that's not really the right way to look at sleep or its impact on fat loss or gain, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I'd agree, because I know we have sleep and hydration targets as part of our transformation, basic transformation checklist. And I see them always as indirect non-negotiables for fat loss, because although being dehydrated and or not sleeping enough isn't directly going to hamper your fat loss goals, they're going to put you in a position, if you are hitting them, just to be able to achieve them so much more effectively. As we know, if you're hydrated, then you're going to have more mental clarity as well as your physical performance being better. So training's going to be better, decision making is going to be better around food and lifestyle, and then sleep as well. If we know that if you're sleeping insufficiently, your cravings for food is going to be increased. So although you don't actually have an increased need or requirement for food, your perceived requirement for food is higher. So you're more likely to then overindulge on food. Your performance in the gym is going to be lower. Your general activity is likely to be lower as well if you have less energy. And these are things where, although it doesn't directly translate to fat gain or even just slower rate of fat loss, it translates to poorer adherence, which we know then translates to negative results.
Mm-hmm. And also, if these poor nights of sleep are continuous throughout the week, they can actually accumulate to a worse partitioning ratio, which simply means that even if you are in a calorie deficit, the propensity of muscle mass loss compared to fat, it's actually higher with less and less sleep that you get throughout the week. So you may be in the same deficit, you may be eating the same calories, but because you aren't sleeping effectively, the ratio of your fat to muscle loss can be skewed in the direction that we don't want it to go. So again, sleep indirectly affecting our fat loss efforts there. As Ed said, expenditure is just can go into the toilet if you can't train as hard or move around as much.
So why do you think people potentially start waking up more at night when they start something new, like a transformation journey? They start waking up at night, or they feel their sleep gets a bit rocked initially. What do you think is at play there?
I think a lot of it. So, did you want to go?
Yeah. No, you go.
I was going to say, one of the most common things that we do here is waking up to pee a lot more than they're used to. And again, that can be down to a few factors. If you've just overhauled your nutritional approach and you're now eating a lot more whole foods, you're hydrating yourself a lot more just with fluids anyway. Your habits are going to change to some degree, and an increase in urination is potentially going to happen, especially when you first start. And also, there are mechanisms at play when you are losing body weight and you are losing body fat. Water losses throughout the night do just become more common as well. So that's just a sign that things are sort of happening on the fat loss, weight loss front. And for some people, that's worse than in others. But again, it's nothing to really be. And again, people think that getting up to pee once in the middle of the night is a bad thing, or twice. It's not a bad thing. If you get up and pee, and then because I still get up once or twice to go pee. As long as you go back to bed and you fall asleep, that's the main thing. What I think what people start to get, they think that just because they're waking up and going to pee, that there's something wrong. So, oh my God, what's going on here? But no, that's completely fine. If as long as you can fall back to sleep and there's no issues in staying up, you don't stay up, you don't sit there for like an hour and a half, 2 hours after you've peed, then you're fine. Don't stress about it. And we'll probably talk about this later on, but I think people also stress about not sleeping, if that makes sense. So they overemphasize it and they put it like, obviously they know it's important, but then they feel like a complete failure, or they think that their next day is a complete write-off if they haven't had a good night's sleep, which is just not the case.
That's actually something that I had a while ago now, but I remember someone telling me, and I don't think this is actually even correct, but I remember someone just said, if you lie there and just pretend to sleep, you get 90% of the benefits of if you actually sleep. No, it's probably like completely not true, but if you're lying there struggling to sleep, I used to tell myself, look, just chill out, you'll get at least 90% of the benefits. And inadvertently, it calms you. It makes you think it's not such a big deal. I'm not, missing out on all this stuff. And you end up actually calming yourself and getting much better sleep. So definitely maybe a time when a placebo potentially, helped quite a lot. But I think the mindset thing is massive as well, because if you do have a bad night's sleep, we know that physiologically things can change, but a lot of it's in your mind as well. I think if you go into a gym session thinking, I didn't sleep, I only got my 6 hours last night, I'm going to be weak, you're more likely to be weak. Or I think sometimes you just need to pretend that wasn't an issue and just crack on, because I think we've all been there where we've slept badly and still gone in and smashed it.
Yeah. One of the most energizing things, I think, sometimes. I didn't get probably the best night's sleep last night. I'm looking forward to training after this podcast, because I know it's just going to energize me for the rest of the day, as opposed to not training because I feel a bit more tired than normal.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, all of us, we've spoken about this numerous times. How many times have we gone to the gym feeling like mud and end up getting PBs? Yeah, I've hit many PBs on sleep deprivation, and I've had poor sessions going into my session completely with a lot of sleep. There's so many factors that go into performance that if you sort of nocebo yourself thinking, I've had a poor night's sleep, there's no point going to the gym. You're just doing yourself a disservice, because you can still be doing something productive in there, even if you've not had the best night's sleep, right?
Do you think you're a good sleeper now?
And this is another reason. Me?
Yeah, go on. If you want to carry on your point first.
No, I was going to say, I definitely feel like I'm a better sleeper now. For sure. Yeah. Because I don't like, when people talk about wearables and trying to use HRV as like a measurement of recovery, and then they use HRV, which is like heart rate variability. The whole premise is the higher your heart rate variability, which means the variability between beats, the more recovered you are, so to speak, meaning that the higher your score, the better you're going to be able to perform theoretically. And there are apps out there, there are gadgets out there, they'll tell you how prepared you are based on your HRV, which again has at the moment, no real scientific evidence to be utilized within strength training whatsoever. But again, people see that number on their phone and go, recovery day today. I'm not ready to train. I can't train hard today because of this HRV thing. So that's just an issue I have with a lot of these sleep trackers that tell you those things. I personally wear a Fitbit to sleep. I have been wearing it for the last month or so, but I don't wear it for it to tell me how much deep sleep or REM sleep I'm getting, because I know it's not accurate. But I use it as a rough gauge to see how much overall sleep I am getting, because the accuracy does seem to be pretty good with that, like the difference between your actual sleep time versus wake time. But it just can't really tell the difference between REM and deep sleep, which is fine. And I just use it just to see, okay, cool, how much sleep am I getting per night? And then I'll correlate that subjectively as much as I can to how I feel that day. And I have been noticing with certain things that I do, and then again, I'll experiment with certain things I do at night or don't do at night and see how much of an impact that has on my sleep. And funnily enough, not being on my laptop until 8:30 and 9 p.m. actually works out pretty well. Like I can fall asleep a lot easier.
Honestly, that's what did me yesterday. But I'll let you carry on, then I'll tell you.
Yeah. So I've actually been clocking a couple 7-hour PBs as of late, which is like completely unheard of for me. So this started over on the weekend. So on Saturday, Sunday, I ended up getting the 7 hours, but then I also got 7 on Monday and Tuesday, which is, it's very unheard of for me. But again, it is because of shifting a few things, finishing up work earlier, getting a lot of my work done first thing, a lot of my activity stuff as well, more like midday, afternoon, etc. And then yeah, just really easing myself into the evening as much as I possibly can, where I can. So yeah, it's been interesting. That's how I like to use these sleep trackers. Use them as a way to see how various factors can influence your sleep, and then make a few changes. That's the way I like to use them.
A great thing you can do as well, if you do use them, is before you look at your score in the morning, is give your own score. Because I believe there is some research to show that you match subconsciously how you feel to what the score is. So if it tells you you are under recovered, if you see that first thing, naturally or subconsciously you start to feel, oh yeah, I'm a bit less, I'm not really that recovered, and you take it easy. Whereas if you even just jot down a piece of paper or whatever, so when you first get up, I don't know, even just score out 10 or whatever, you can then compare that to the tracker and see how close it is, and make sure it isn't just this self-fulfilling prophecy of just, actually, I feel terrible, but it's saying I'm really good, so I'm going to go in and smash it. Or I feel great, but this is telling me I'm bad. Oh no, I've got to have a rest day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Like, I'll never use the sleep tracker to determine whether or not I'm training that day. Like, I'm still gonna go in and train. Like, it's just a good piece of information to sort of see what factors can influence your sleep onset, and just what can sort of keep you asleep. And then if you get like a night of like 7 hours uninterrupted or whatever it is, and then you go, okay, cool. What did I do that day just before? Was there anything that I did differently? Could I replicate it? And then you sort of work from there. But yeah, I'll never ever let it dictate my decision on whether to train hard or not, because my body will do that naturally when I go into the gym and as you start warming up and as you feel. Because you're never going to know how you're going to perform in the gym until you actually get in there. That's what I've learned over my years. I don't know if you guys would agree.
Yeah, the last 2 nights I've had literally 2 opposing nights sleep. I clocked 8 hours of both nights, but the way I feel the next day is completely different. It's purely just because I had a different evening routine. So the 2 nights ago, I had one of the best nights sleep in a long time. And it's actually, and that's more sort of the norm for what I get in. And I literally I remember I watched one episode I'm watching Homeland at the moment. I watched one episode of Homeland, and then I turned the TV off at like 8:30, and then I just read a book for like 45 minutes. And then I read it, book 45 minutes in bed. And then I just went to sleep. And when I was reading, I was like, I know I'm going to get a good night's sleep tonight, because I haven't, I turned my phone off at 7:30. So I was really like in a good place to sleep. Yesterday, I turned my phone off early. I watched my Homeland, but then afterwards I was like, I forgot to do this one bit today. And then I ended up doing some work from 8:45 till 9:35. And that 50 minutes, it wasn't like super intensive, but it was enough to like get me a little bit wired.
Yeah.
And then I still, like, after that, put the thing away, went to sleep, slept 8 hours. But I woke up today and I was just like, I was like, that sense of slight like headache and just slight sort of fatigue. And I know it's exactly was that. And the weird thing was, when I was doing it, I was like, I know I'm sacrificing my sleep quality right now.
No seabed a little bit. But yeah, no, it's exactly right. And this is because you're engaging in something. You're also getting electronics shining into your face. So your brain is getting all these signals to stay awake. And
I think the work thing is the biggest
your
thing.
onset.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Doing work by that time. It's just a no-go, isn't it? Just on this topic, I think it's some really interesting stuff, because wearable tech is a massively growing trend at the moment. Things like Fitbit, but more recently you got the Whoop, and you got Oura rings. And we get commonly asked, like, should I get a Whoop ring, Whoop strap? Should I get an Oura ring? And they're not cheap, so you got to think twice before buying them. They're a couple £100. Are they worth it? And what benefit can you get? Because, like yourself, I've heard of people say, look, I can't train today because of my Whoop strap tells me to rest, or it's not an optimal day to train, or whatever it may be. What are some of the benefits? But also, should people be looking into that sort of data, and is the data actually relevant? Because I think we're entering into a new age where there's more data than ever, but it's knowing what data is important to track and what data is probably not, and what data is actually probably going to cause you more stress than anything. So how can we approach the subject of wearable tech, especially those 3 ones there?
So I think what I mentioned earlier, I just don't think we're there yet for something to be able to tell you how hard you should train or not.
How does that mechanism work?
Again,
how does the mechanism work?
It just doesn't. It doesn't, like, because it will measure.
How should it work? What are they saying?
Okay. Yeah. So it measures your heart rate variability. And if
Find that?
So it's the amount of variation between sort of your heartbeats. So remember, there is no, if we're using like a metronome, like a 1 second timer or whatever, that's the variability or the difference between beat to beat and how much that changes does have some sort of correlation with recovery. So the higher your heart rate variability, the more recovered you are, and the lower your heart rate variability, the less recovered you are, and you're more sympathetically driven. You're not very parasympathetic if we're talking about like nervous system sort of things. And you don't want to be training, or the recommendation is if you are dipping below your personal, so you got to find out what your personal HRV is as well, right? Before you can you need to establish a baseline to see what's your average. And then once you start dipping below your average, that's usually a sign of under recovery, meaning that you have to prioritize other things to get your HRV back up. And then over time, the goal is to sort of build that up. And I understand like it can be a great way to potentially prioritize recovery methods and stressing less and going out for more walks and doing positive behaviors that are going to help bring your stress levels down. The issues I see is, again, people placeboing or noceboing themselves into thinking that that's the gold standard for what they should do that day based on some arbitrary number. That's still not accurate, you know. And even with the Oura ring, I believe they are, with regards to like accuracy in determining those sort of things, I think they are probably going to be the best on the market as of now. But if I was to use like a wearable that expensive, I would just use it for sleep. Oura does seem to be very accurate with regards to determining REM, so rapid eye movement sleep, and deep sleep, which in my opinion can be useful to know if those are the things that you want to sort of quantify. But what you do with that information with regards to your training and eating, I don't think there's much you can do, in my opinion. But I think there are other behavioral things that you can work on to help improve those aspects of your sleep, if those were things that you wanted to improve on.
Yeah.
You're on mute.
What would someone do with that data? Okay, I've got 5 hours REM or whatever the number is. What are you going to do? How are you going to know what's going to improve it?
Yeah, and again, those things, like, it's really that's when you can start playing. Okay, if I do this at night, or if I don't stimulate my brain with a lot of things, what does that do to my sleep?
Okay.
Or if I use binaural beats before I go to sleep, or if I use binaural beats as I'm sleeping, does that make a difference to my sleep? So that way you can start experimenting and finding things that work and don't work. But again, how you fall asleep that night is also just so many factors go into it as well. Perceived level of stress is very hard to quantify, you know.
I think tracking all these things can seem cool, and if you've got all these different graphs and things, you feel like a bit like an athlete and all of this. Like, I can see why it's like appealing, but as you kind of touched on, unless it's usable information that's actually going to change the way you're doing things, it's a complete waste of time, and you're using up bandwidth analyzing and procrastinating over these numbers, which, if you're not actually going to make any changes for, is just pointless. I remember, I think I even said, I did an internship once. I was doing a hydration test for the players, and it was basically like me using samples of their urine each week or whatever. I had to do the test, and then I'd type it up, and then it'd put it up in the changing room, and it'd be every player's name ordered, and like who's hydrated, who's on like the borderline, who's unhydrated. It didn't influence anything at all. All it was just kept the intern busy for half an hour a week, and then the players would go and be like, your piss is yellow or whatever, like for that for 2 minutes. And that's all it was. Like, it was a complete waste of time. And it wasn't like, okay, the top 3 people, like, right, here's a bottle of water, you need to drink that in the next 2 hours. Or, do you know what I mean? Like, there was no action to it. And that's the kind of thing I think here is, like, people see, I've got this, whatever reading, whether it's sleep or whatever. And then it's like, okay, well, how's that going to change what you're doing? And then, like you also said, there's so many things that come into play. How many people are just nailing the basic foundations? Like, how many people eat consistently well? How many people actually do a working set when they're supposed to train in the gym? How many people remain? I can't remember the last working set I saw. How many people are just active on a day-to-day basis. Like these things are just, even just like hydration, how many people are just hitting or remaining hydrated throughout the day? These things all play a part in so many of these different areas. And it's like you're looking at the top of this pyramid, like, all right, that's my REM sleep, that's this, that. Like your foundation is totally wobbly. You've missed the last 3 gym sessions, you're eating Snicker bars for lunch, and you haven't drunk water in the last 2 days. Like that's not the big concern here, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But then those who are fitness enthusiasts, I think where it can go wrong potentially is over collecting data and then seeing, trying to find that 1% again before the foundation's laid, but also just stressing themselves out over that a little bit. I think you mentioned it on a couple of podcasts ago, Ivan, where around like lifting the bonnet when there's no need to. And I think this can be potentially another scenario where you collect data where all you end up doing is thinking something's wrong when you might be feeling everything's okay, or you may be like you said, perceiving yourself into thinking something is wrong.
I know, and we really underestimate the power of placebo. It's insane. You guys just reminded me, there was this research done on, I'm not so sure if it was Fitbit or it was one of those wearables. Or no, the scientists did like a sham sort of sleep test on people, and they literally told one group that no matter how they slept, so whether they slept well or not, the scientists would tell the one group, oh yeah, your rapid eye movement sleep is very, very low. It's probably likely you're going to feel quite bad today. And then they told another group, oh yeah, REM and deep sleep were like through the roof. Well done, good job. And no matter what group each person sort of fell in, they just responded to what the scientists told them about their sleep, which is nuts, right? So, and remember, let's just say you're wearing a wearable that isn't 100% accurate. As I said earlier, the Fitbit, the one that I've got, is not very accurate with regards to determining rapid eye movement and deep sleep. So when I see those scores like a little bit out of whack, like I'm like, that's fine. I don't trust that, All I trust is, okay, cool. And if it's consistent for me, okay, I slept this much one night. I felt pretty trash when I got like 5.5 hours. Okay, that's pretty understandable. But I still trained. I still did what I needed to do. But even on the day that I got 7 hours, I still felt relatively sluggish at some parts throughout the morning. It took me a while to get going. So I was like, okay, was that 7 hours very restorative then? Probably not, because I was sort of up and up. I was waking up more frequently for various reasons. You know what I mean? So it's not 100% applicable too. But again, I'm very experienced when it comes to this sort of stuff, and I can use that information in some way. But again, I'm never going to let it determine what I do the following day, if that makes sense. It would just make me aware of certain things that, okay, what could have impacted that? Maybe I should try that. And this is like tweaking minor things just to see what works and what doesn't. But could also be in my head as well.
Yeah, once someone plants a seed in your head, you start believing that story, don't you?
Yeah, it's fascinating.
So on the wearables,
I think for most people, they shouldn't bother with those numbers, right? They shouldn't focus on those 1%, as Ed said. There are so many other things that you should be concerning yourself over.
So with wearable tech, is outside of just looking at how many hours you might have slept, is it just steps then, or is there any other benefit? I mean, even steps is quite variable, but ultimately it's consistency of the device, right? But what are your thoughts on the other benefits that they propose, or are we literally limited to those two?
I think there can. So I was going to say, I think there can be a place if it increases your engagement or enjoyment potentially. And this is where sometimes I think like having those toys or whatever, if it gets you more excited and more engaged in it and really want to like looking forward to your sessions, then I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily. Like I was geeking out with Ivan the other week about, I got a heart rate monitor a couple of months ago, and so I wear it for my cardio. Like I'm so much more excited for cardio. I've got it up on the screen. It's like, I've got it where like on the graphs going. I can look at the data afterwards, and then I can, look at average heart rate and then compare it to previous sessions where I've covered, or like compared to the same distance and things. And that's just made it just more exciting for me. And that's maybe just I'm a geek with that, but like it's made it more enjoyable. I'm probably working harder in those cardio sessions as well. And so as long as I don't go too far down the rabbit hole of, like analyzing everything to the absolute minutiae, it's like, it's helping, it's having a positive effect on what I'm giving to those sessions. And so I think if there's something that can get you excited, like that, and make you, I think it's slightly off topic. At least in England, how many like middle-aged men are really into biking these days? Like road cycling. It's just because they all get to buy all the gear, they get to feel like they're part of something, they feel like an athlete. You know what I mean? Like loads of them aren't even in shape. But it's like, it makes you feel like that. You start tracking your heart rate, suddenly like start that like early morning just spinning in my living room. Now I'm like, oh my God, I feel like I'm, like doing something cool. And if that makes me pedal faster, then like brilliant, I think.
Yeah. In that scenario though, Ed, you are using that data for something applicable though. You can see, okay, I'm seeing my heart rate improve at a certain wattage, or I'm seeing my fitness improve. But that's how you're using that tech. Your tech is telling you, okay, I actually am improving. And I would say those measurements are probably going to be more consistent and more accurate than, say, what you get when you're trying to track your sleep. That's really hard to do. It's really hard because remember, a lot of the sleep stuff is based on your heart rate throughout the evening as well. So that's how they determine whether or not you're in deep sleep, REM. That's how a lot of these mechanisms work. But there are other things that can impact those variables that are not sleep related. So it's really tricky, very, very tricky. But from the way that you're using it, that's bang on, because you're using it to improve your performance in something, where you're seeing it as a gauge of, okay, cool, what I'm doing is working, which can be cool.
So would you recommend anyone buying an Oura Ring or a Whoop strap? Or I mean, Fitbits, I think it's more commonly used by sort of general population, just because people use it for the steps. I think the Oura and the Whoop are what people graduate to afterwards, right? So that's from what I've seen anyway. I've considered it a few times, like, should I get an Oura Ring, should I get a Whoop strap? But now I'm just not really into all those sorts of things to want to make the investment. But when would it be? Would you recommend one to anyone? And why above a Fitbit? By the way, we have no affiliation to either of those.
Yeah, and I'm sure they're fantastic products as well for the right person. But I don't think if your goals are body transformation, wanting to live a healthier, better life, I definitely don't think they're a necessity whatsoever. I think who could potentially benefit from them could be high-level endurance athletes, in my opinion. People who are training like a lot, clocking in a lot of hours, where you do have the time to train for hours on end, and you do have to sort of monitor things more closely. I would say there may be some benefit there, but even in those scenarios, I would still, as cliche as it sounds, listen to my body more than a device to tell me how I'm supposed to be feeling.
So really, the only sort of benefits for it are if you think of it as an accountability element, or if you think of it as an enjoyable element, as in it makes being fit more enjoyable. Outside of those two benefits, you're probably not going to get as much out of it.
I think there's definitely a hole that you can fall down, which I think we've already touched on, but of just focusing on the wrong things. You've only got so much attention and bandwidth. You can focus on these little minutiae, but it's the big rocks that we know are going to make the difference. So for most people, I'd recommend just really focusing on those big things, because we know you don't need a Fitbit even to get an amazing shape.
No, I've never had a Fitbit.
Not at all.
Yeah, I use my phone to track steps, which is probably to my detriment.
Yeah, me too.
I just use pen and paper.
You don't get as many steps.
every step is still a tick. Yeah.
Well, the things the bouncers have where they click people in. I just do that in my pocket, like click, click, click.
At least you'll be very present when you're walking.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. The Fitbits are notorious overestimators of how many steps you take.
Yeah, you get an extra 2,000-3,000 steps, don't you?
Or we've spoken about this before, but just the estimate of energy expenditure, that's the worst.
Oh yeah. We haven't covered that.
Oh my God. Like, you know what I mean? That's just ridiculous.
It's your biggest pet peeve, this one.
Oh.
So let's go into that then, because I think all of them do this, right? Was it just the Fitbit?
I think they all do.
No,
they all do. Okay,
they all try to track it.
Just to give some background on this, the Fitbit might tell you you're burning 4,000 calories or whatever. So technically, if you're playing if you're playing thermodynamic game, you should be eating 4,000 calories just to maintain your body weight. But if anyone's watching this on YouTube, you'll see Ivan shaking his head furiously. In the community, this is one question that gets him all riled up. So yeah, tell us what the crack is with this.
Yeah, it's just I personally don't know how they get such inflated numbers. To be fair, I think there has to be some estimation of like active minutes, or they take your heart rate and they just try to make an estimate based on that, which is just not. You can't. And this is what Ed and I discussed this before. Like heart rate in and of itself doesn't mean anything with regards to like energy expenditure, because what matters most is your work output. And this is where people get confused, where they think, oh, just as long as my heart rate is super high, I'm burning a ton of calories. But that's not true. If something stressed you out right now and you heard the worst news in your life, your heart rate would go to like 150 or whatever. You're not going to be burning that much calories. You're just sitting down. You're not doing much. And this is where they got a lot of that research. You know how people were like, oh, chess players, they burn like 5,000 calories in a game. No, they don't. No, they don't, man. That is insanity. Those measurements were coming from potential heart rate. You know what I mean? If you're playing a very intense game, and then they'll correlate your sort of heart rate to how much energy you could potentially be burning. But if you're not moving and you're not using that energy, you're not going to be expending that much energy, right? So I think a lot of these Fitbits or gadgets, they use a similar sort of predictability model, and then they tell you, okay, well, because your heart rate's been at this high for this long, you must be expending this amount of energy. Combine that with active steps, whatever that means, and or whatever it is. They just give this insanely inflated number, and I'm not too sure if that's your total energy for the day, or if that's just your total that you've expended from only exercising, because that would be even more ludicrous. Because it's like they don't take anything else into consideration, right? They don't take your BMR, they don't take nothing, because it's just like, is that your total energy from exercise, or is that your total energy from just you being you? But yeah, it's completely inaccurate, and people that try to eat according to their Fitbit do not end up getting very good results ever. And just it's very frustrating.
I think you've got that really good example, Ivan, just to maybe simplify it a bit when you talk about like heart rate against output as well of Lance Armstrong, because I think, and this just shows potentially how you can be burning very different amounts of calories at a similar heart rate. So like say me and Lance Armstrong were both at 150 beats per minute. The pace that he would be going at to be at 150 beats per minute, it might be like 40 kilometers an hour. I might be hitting that only doing 20 kilometers an hour. So the amount of energy that's required to go at double the speed of me is going to require more energy for him to do that, even though our heart rates are the same. And that's just because our relative fitness.
Yeah. And another good way to demonstrate that is, if people think, oh, I've got to be at a heart rate to be burning X amount of calories. Well, no, if your heart rate is at 150 and you're doing 300 watts on the bike, but Lance Armstrong can exert 300 watts on the bike and keep his heart rate at 100 beats per minute, who's burning more calories? That's if you both go for the same distance for the same time, you both will be burning the same calories. But if your heart rate is at 150, 160, you're going to tank out pretty quick compared to Lance Armstrong, who's just going to keep that 300 watts for an hour, but his heart rate is going to stay low. So he is able to produce more work with a lower heart rate, making him fitter, making him capable of expending more energy. And I think, Lyle McDonald said this once, where it's quite a dichotomy. The people that can burn the most calories are the ones who don't usually need to burn the most calories through exercise. And the ones who need to physically just can't, you know what I mean? It's quite an interesting comment, but that's exactly what's going on here. People think, oh, you do more cardio, you get more efficient, you don't burn as much calories. That's complete nonsense. You get fitter and you can produce more work with less effort, meaning that you can continually burn more calories because you're fitter. You have more capacity to burn more energy. So there's a bit of a misunderstanding there.
Very interesting. And just off the back of that, how does increases in muscle mass then affect, if anything, on energy expenditure?
You asking me or Ed?
Who wants to go for it?
So to my understanding, I think the the notion out there is that the more muscle you get on, like the more calories you're going to be expending. To my understanding, it doesn't seem to be that significant of a difference if you are relatively, especially if you're relatively sedentary. What normally comes about if there is a change in energy expenditure is that your output is just higher. So potentially linked in with building more muscle, you become more active because you're now, instead of not going to the gym, you're now going to the gym 5 times a week. You're living a healthy lifestyle, whatever. Likewise, linked into what Ivan said, if the longer you've been training hard, your output in the gym is going to be higher. Now, we know weight training isn't like a really efficient way to burn calories, but I'm sure now I'm burning more calories per session than I was 10 years ago. And part of that's just because the quality of my training is better. And so that, that's just the same in terms of what we were kind of saying earlier. But in terms of just if you woke up tomorrow with a bit of extra muscle, to my current understanding, unless you change your activity, there isn't going to be a big change. And on paper, the numbers might be slightly different. How much of a meaningful difference that can make? To my understanding, at the moment, it's not a lot.
Yeah, it's to put it bluntly, for every extra pound of muscle you have on you, you burn an extra 6 calories a day. But that's at rest. Okay. Once you're moving and actually using those muscles, it could be increased to 7. No, it could increase a little bit. But again, I think a lot of people, what people don't also take into consideration is that a lot of your BMR, people say, oh, that's just how much energy it costs to keep you alive. A lot of that, yes, that is a lot of that comes down to lean mass, but that's not actually just muscle. Your organs actually take up a heap of energy. They expend more energy than your muscles by far. Liver, kidneys, heart, spleen, all those things, all those more important organs, they exert or they expend a lot more energy than and our brains obviously than our muscles, which is very interesting. So when people go on a very extended diet, yes, you're going to be dropping body fat, you're going to become smaller in general, but a lot of the BMR reductions comes down to you losing a relatively high amount of organ mass, which is just another byproduct of you just getting smaller in general, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just all part of the process. But, if your organs start to shrink as well, that means that your total energy expenditure will also come down. And that plays a huge part in the whole metabolic slowdown or adaptation thing that we can probably talk at a later date. But 6 calories per pound of extra muscle. So you gain 20 pounds of muscle across your lifespan, you're burning an extra 120 calories a day at rest. And which is what, 2 apples?
Well, I guess the more active you are, then the more that those muscles are going to be.
Exactly.
It's quite similar to when I remember looking into. I used to drink quite a lot of green tea, being like, "Oh, it's going to get me so shredded because I know it speeds up my metabolism and all this." And then I worked it out with some people, and I think it was like you needed 7 cups a day to burn like an extra 60 calories or something. Which but for some people, maybe 60 calories is not a bad, but like it wasn't this mind-blowing thing of like, I'll just keep eating how I am. I'll just have a green tea with my dinner and I'll be shredded in 2 weeks.
Well, I think if you're doing everything and you're really looking for the small bits, those sorts of things could potentially add up.
And especially if you're a small female on
that's 500 calories a week, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I'm not trying to downplay it, but I think a lot of people overestimate that.
I mean, if you're doing it while having a burger, it's not going to make a difference. If you're doing it with 16 weeks of rigidity, it might make a difference. So the finishing sentiment on that is if your Fitbit tells you burn an extra 300 calories, it doesn't entitle you to an extra 300 calories of intake. And worse than that, I think it also can lead to just bad behavior and sort of bad relationship with food when you start linking your intake to a tracker and you start thinking, oh yeah, I've deserved these calories, or I'm allowed more calories because I've done X, or whatever that relationship may form. It's kind of like when people bank calories, or when people say, oh, I've got banked 2,000 calories Monday to Friday, so I'm going to have a big gorge on the weekend. Technically, it's not a bad thing, but I think mentally and long term, it's not a good thing for a relationship with food. It just entices that yo-yo behavior, whether it's on a daily or a weekly or a monthly basis.
Yeah, agreed.
Cool. So to conclude on wearable tech, be wary. Just remember what you're doing it for, and make sure it's for the right reasons, or make sure it's fulfilling whatever reason it is for you, and just make sure you don't read into it too much.